So welcome to the Saturday morning Awareness Through Movement lesson. Today is the 6th of February 2021, and we're going to be starting our month of lessons around eyes and vision, because the eyes control the tonus of the cervical spine, the muscles of the neck, and they also respond. There are more nerve endings in the area of the brain with relation to the eyes than there are for the other muscles that control the neck. So when you think about how do you orient yourself in space? So for those of you at home, just settle onto a quilt or a mat on your back. And think about how do you know where you are in space? How do you figure out what your orientation in space is? Meaning, how do you tell if you're upright or lying down? You have teleceptors in your head. You have eyes, ears, nose, mouth, sense of smell. That's the main way that we figure out where we are in space. And one of the main functions of the nervous system of the brain is to keep the head safe. The brain, because it's the central processing unit that runs everything. So the minute we're upright in gravity, there's a reflex or a response that tries to keep the eyes or the head upright so that the eyes can see around, so that you can swivel around this central axis of your skeleton. And one of the reasons we work lying down with the eyes closed in a place where it's quieter is to reduce the stimulus, because the less input you have from the visual field and from the audio field, and if you feel warm and comfortable and safe, then it's easier to notice small differences, which is the most basic way that we learn things, is to differentiate between black and white, gray and black, this and that, good and bad. So we were talking about the concept of soft eyes, and that is the idea of just allowing your eyes to relax. So bring your awareness to your eyes and notice if you're holding any tension there, and see if there is some of that you can release consciously. And the eyes are attached. They're muscles. They're muscles that above and below and to each side of the eyes that help control what we're looking at. And so if those muscles are constantly held in one position, that creates a shortening in the muscles and a limitation in where you're apt to look. Like your choices are you're less likely to look up if you hardly ever look up, for example. So bring your awareness, your attention to your forehead. Just notice if you have any furrow in your brow, and let that soften. And speaking of orientation in space, with your eyes closed, imagine what's in front of you. And in Awareness Through Movement, we're always orienting the lesson from your point of view rather than from the outside, because we want you to grow your ability to appreciate your own subjective experience. So what's in front of you is actually above when you're lying down. And your postural muscles don't have to be engaged. There's no danger of falling. The brain, the nervous system recognizes that, and so it can let go at a deeper level. Notice your mouth. Do you have your tongue plastered to the roof of your mouth, or are your lips shut tightly? And see if you can soften that. So you're noticing habits that you may have around the jaw, or the way that you use your mouth when you're in your everyday life. And here it's an opportunity to just sort of soften that. And then in terms of orientation, think about everything to the right of you. And notice that even with your eyes closed, you have a sense of how far the wall is from you, or if there's another person to your right. And if you soften your eyes and your neck and your shoulders, the point being that we have these habits that are like we effort when we don't need to. So you could let all of that tension go because it really isn't, it doesn't have any, there's no need for it right now. It's not helping whatever it is. If your intention is to sense what's to your right, the tension that you're holding isn't helping with that. It's not conducive to a better function or anything. And then sense what's to the left of you. And notice that you could soften your eyes and soften your face and jaw and your shoulders and your neck. And it might almost feel like you can perceive what's to the left of you more easily than if you're straining. And notice the quality of sensation you feel on the entire left side of your face, the left side of your jaw, neck, shoulders, into the left side of your body. Maybe the length of it, the shape of it. And then bring your attention to the right side again. Notice the quality of sensation that you feel on the right side of your face, jaw, neck, shoulder, and into the right side of your body. And the length of it, the shape of it, so that you begin to get better and better at noticing what's the shape of your whole self on the mat, as if you were a Rorschach blot, ink blot, right? If you were to take your body, if your body were to float upwards and there was an ink mark left on the mat underneath you, what shape would that be? So if you're more comfortable with your knees bent, go ahead and bend your knees and stand your feet, or if you're okay with your legs long, do whatever you want. But imagine a point in front of you. Let's give it a color, maybe the shape of a pearl, a white pearl. So you imagine this pearl that is very close to your face, and focus that image with both eyes. Your eyes are closed, you're imagining this pearl, and you're imagining it come a little bit further and further away from you, so that it goes, it's as if it's just wafting up towards the ceiling. And maybe take that image up towards the ceiling and then bring it back close to you, and do that several times at your own pace. And notice if you can sense that your eyes are somehow doing something different, and take extra care to be very gentle with your eyes. And then let that go and just rest. And notice if you feel a difference in the sensation of your eyes when you choose to rest them. What's the difference between work and not work? I think this is a growing issue, because the more we work, the harder it is to not work if we work all the time. So, what does it feel like to not work? Is it okay? Can I feel okay within myself if I'm just being still? I think it's been the crisis of 2020. Everybody was, so many of us were sort of suddenly had less to do, and we didn't know what to do with ourselves. So take a breath and clear that idea, because it's probably not where we want to go. And then bring to mind this pearl, and have it be a comfortable distance. Like, where is the distance? It's going to be different for each person. Where's the distance for you, whereby you can easily and comfortably focus on a point close to your face without feeling strain, and then take it further away up to the ceiling, and then slowly bring it back at your own pace a couple of times again. And then the next time you take it up towards the ceiling, go through the ceiling, through the apartments above this room, through the roof of the building, up past the tallest trees in town, up to the sky, and further, even further. Take it out through the atmosphere into space, and go as far with this pearl as you can into space. And notice in the background, there's this idea of background, foreground that lots of lessons play with. So, the instruction is hopefully not a recipe. It's not necessarily instruction, but I'm hoping to convey principles. But for now, the instruction is, in the foreground, is to take this pearl as far away as you can, and whenever you feel like, oh, that's it, I'm good, let it come back towards you slowly. In the background, can you scan your jaw, your lips, your breathing? Make sure that you aren't inadvertently going back to some old habit of holding or bracing or tensing when you try something that's outside your comfort zone or outside your sphere of familiarity. My mother tells me that when my grandmother used to visit her in Switzerland, she'd bring her own toilet paper, and this was probably early 50s. That seems a little strange to me. She didn't trust the toilet paper in Switzerland. Which I'll grant you is a bit scratchy compared to American toilet paper.
It used to be like brown and...
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe they were recycling long before we were, because it was a bit rougher. But yeah, there were no weight restrictions back then for carrying luggage, so I guess it wasn't a deal. And then when you bring this pearl back towards you, send it out again, and send it out as if it's light. And actually, send that pearl out, but imagine it being fairly light. I mean, a pearl is pretty light anyway. But it's helpful once you get out into space, because it has a shimmer to it. It reflects light like stars. And so these habits of, in the background, noticing this, cultivating a new habit of noticing if you're bracing or tuning yourself out as you try something unfamiliar. It's a clue. It helps you notice whether or not you're perhaps rigid with yourself in some way that you were not aware of. Maybe somebody told you the right way to sit or stand or be or attend or listen. And could you just be a little bit more soft with yourself overall? so that you just put less effort into everything you do. And then the next time you're ready to have this come down towards you, this pearl, maybe it enters the atmosphere, and all of a sudden you allow it to transform in your imagination into a white feather. And so a white feather has this ability to catch the air, so it wafts in a slightly different way, perhaps not in a direct line, but it might move around slightly. So you imagine it moving and you follow it with your eyes as it comes closer and closer to you. And notice if you can feel a difference in sensation in your eyes as they maybe make these little micro accommodations or adjustments to follow the slight side-to-side movement of the feather as it comes closer and closer down through the heavens, down through the sky, through the building, and closer into this building and into this room and towards your face. And notice at what point, where's your comfort level in terms of the closest you want to bring this thing to your face such that there's no sense of strain. And then let it waft up within the room, so up towards the ceiling and come back down towards yourself again. And then give it a rest. Let it take a rest and just take a break. So rest from using your eyes in this unfamiliar, intense way. Give yourself a moment to process. Give your brain, your nervous system, a chance to process. Yeah, this is a much less active lesson than, the I series are generally less active. But I think we'll do a little bit of something more active within this at some point. But yeah, feel free to get a blanket and make sure you're warm. Some of the lessons are extremely active, so this is a really good series to do if you're stuck in the middle of the night and you can't sleep. Because sometimes if you play with these ideas and whatever you remember of the lesson in the middle of the night, you find that it does relax you and you just sort of fall asleep halfway through. So yes, just so there is a little bit of movement going on so that we're not disassociating from the rest of the body, go ahead and bend your knees and stand your feet and see if you can have a sense that we talked earlier about the position of the pelvis and the sit bones. Maybe bring your knees over your torso for a moment and and then set your feet down, and just bring your knees over your torso and set your feet down, and see if you can sense or imagine when you bring your knees over your torso, can you track in your mind the change in the position of your sit bones and how your tailbone comes up towards the ceiling when you rock your knees over your body, and then how the pelvis moves. And let it move through you so that it moves through your whole skeleton. In other words, when you bring your knees over your body, your pelvis rocks, your spine is attached to your pelvis, your spine is attached to your head, so you should feel some movement and response in your head and neck and in your chin, unless you're holding yourself in some unconsciously rigid way. And then just leave your feet on the ground with your knees up. And then go back to this imagining of this. Find your spot with your eyes closed. Imagine this white feather in front of you. and then let it go away from you, maybe 6 or 7 feet, and let it come back down towards you, but let it come closer than the place where you feel that you could comfortably focus your vision. So just imagine that the feather comes closer, it almost just barely touches your nose to the point where it tickles you, and then take a deep breath and literally blow the thing away from you until it goes up towards the ceiling, and let it come back down. And just do that a few times at your own pace so that the feather comes towards you so close that it tickles you, and either physically push it away with your breath or just imagine a puff of air blowing it away. But allow it to, what do you have to do to make it okay, to make it comfortable, that it can come so close to your nose that you can imagine looking at it with both eyes, even if that is so close that you couldn't see anything normally. And then let that go. Maybe rest with your legs long for a minute. And just noticing that somebody upstairs is jumping up and down, and you can hear the weight, right? So when somebody runs with great force, you can hear the effort of the pounding in the increased sound, right? So vision and hearing are similar in the sense that when you open your eyes, you see things. You don't really have to strain, but we get into an unconscious habit of straining. And so sound and hearing is similar in that, we hear things. We can't even close our eyes, or ears, so they're different that way. You can't close your ears. But we get into these unconscious habits of straining to hear. So while you're resting, can you just imagine opening your audio field, if you will, and just allowing sound to come to you without effort. Trusting that your nervous system actually works and is functioning below the level of your conscious awareness all the time. And this is why we need to do these little rests, because we're not just processing what we're conscious of experiencing, we're processing all this other stuff underneath the radar of consciousness all the time. The brain is doing all kinds of things while we're not, which we completely take for granted. Blood pressure, body temperature, processing sugar and insulin and digestion. And none of that can happen effectively when we're stressed, because when we're stressed, the body's flooded with stress hormones, which equate basically to adrenaline. Cortisol and cortisone are the body's natural hormones that fuel, what do I do in an emergency if I'm about to get run over by a car? And those hormones are dominant. And so if we never take the time to unwind the hormones that govern these basic functions of the nervous system, the housekeeping functions of digestion and immunity and circulation, all of that stuff, they're sort of shunted into the background. They're produced, but it's much more latent. And so it's really important to take time out to have some downtime so that you can experience the feel-good hormones that allow for the interaction between the nervous system and hormonal system so that your health is supported by the chemistry of your own body. So let's just go back one more time. Bend your knees, stand your feet. Imagine the pearl. Go back to the pearl and allow the pearl to go as far up into the firmament as you can possibly imagine. Like, what is infinity? When you think of infinity, does it change the way you use your eyes? Do you have a different sense of the internal experience or sensation you feel in the muscles around your eyes? And then allow it to come back, and do that a few times at your own pace. So, for those of you who are easily bored or easily discouraged, my first encounter with Dr. Mir Schneider, who is the natural vision person who we're going to have come up in April, is I was reading his book about growing up. I guess he was from the Ukraine. His parents were both deaf, and he was born blind, but by the time he was 17, he taught himself to see. And blind meaning legally blind. I mean, he saw shapes and grayness, but he basically was legally blind. But I mean, when he was a teenager, this book describes how he encountered some of the Bates method of natural vision improvement, and how he would spend 13 hours a day doing some of these kinds of exercises that are similar to what we're doing here. So if you're finding this hard to do at first, you won't have to do it for 13 hours a day for sure. But it's just interesting to think about somebody who has that level of will to make a change, and that he was able to do that. He was able, by the time, I mean, it did take him till he was 17, but by the time he was 17, he was able to see. And there were many operations as well. So it's not just the exercises. Anyway, I always wonder what motivates people. How do you generate internal motivation instead of external motivation? And that's one of the reasons I'm intrigued by Feldenkrais, because it's based on the premise that children have an organic way of learning based on curiosity. And so hopefully these explorations incite your curiosity.
Was he self-taught or?
Who? Schneider or Feldenkrais?
The blind person.
Meir Schneider.
Yes.
He was a stubborn blind kid who tried to play football. He tried to ride bicycles. He fell into ditches. He got up and did it again. He encountered the Bates method, which I forget what year that came out, but that's a method that's natural vision. He based what he did on the Bates method.
Okay.
And that's actually, we're going to do a piece of that today, because that's a really good way to sort of introduction to resting the eyes.
Bates did eye exercises.
So Bates developed these natural vision exercises to improve the vision, and Meir Schneider adapted and used that and started coming up with his own, basically. And then these exercises that we're doing today are things that Feldenkrais came up with So it's separate, different, yet based on these same principles of the model of the eyes as they're part of the musculoskeletal system and working with the nervous system to make changes. So see if you can come to sitting for a moment in any way you like. And see if you can find a way to be comfortable in sitting just for a few moments. And if you can find something in front of you that's round, like a clock or maybe one of these light bulbs that's not turned on, find something in front of you that's round. And the question is, how do you figure out what's your dominant eye? Do you know which eye is dominant? So the way that you find your dominant eye is find something round and then put your first fingers together and your thumbs together so that you have a triangle, and put them in front of your face such that you have this round object in the center of the triangle. And hopefully, when everybody has
It doesn't matter how big the round object is.
No, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you can see it with both eyes and it's in the center of your triangle. Okay. Yeah.
Catch some weird views.
And yeah, a doorknob works. Okay, so then close your left eye and notice if the object stays in the middle of the triangle. And then open your left eye and close your right eye, and if the object moves, that is not your dominant eye. So just do it one more time so you're really clear. So you open the left eye, if it's in the middle, that's your dominant eye. And then close that eye, open the right eye if it moves. Isn't that weird?
That's weird.
So just file that somewhere in your brain if you can, and you can always do it again later if you forget. But
What does it mean for your brain?
so what does it mean? Yeah, right? So let's say, well, what I find intriguing is that you would assume that the dominant eye is the good eye, but it's not necessarily the case. So for those of us who've lived with an astigmatism or some kind of dysfunction for most of our lives, there are all these variables. Like sometimes the dominant eye is the one that doesn't work as well, but it's doing all the work. And then the other thing to consider is, everybody has different issues, right? Some of us see well close, and don't see well far away. Some people see well far away. Some people don't see well close. So these are all variables that we're working with here.
If your right eye is dominant, are you usually right-handed?
I think there is some correlation, between handedness and eye dominance, but I don't know that it's probably pretty variable. And I'm certainly not an expert in eyes, so.
Could you say that thing again about, because my left eye is dominant, my left eye is definitely my bad eye, the worst side. So what is that?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't, we were all like, well, what does that mean? Maybe that's not the right question. The right question is, well, what are the things we have to consider, right? And so if your left eye, for example, is the dominant eye, but it's not the better eye, then playing with dominance and increasing, basically what we're talking about here is becoming more ambidextrous only with your eyes instead of your arms and hands, for example. So if you become more ambidextrous in the use of your eyes, then your vision will improve. So for myself, well, I don't want to go into, I'll tell you about how that might have worked later. Let's just let's stay in the body and in the physical experience first. So a Bates method way to rest the eyes, and what Mayer Schneider started working with, is called palming. And this is the idea where you put your hands over your eyes so that your hands are resting on the bones. Your eyes are not being touched in any way by, they're in the palm, so that there's no touch on the eyes, but you're completely excluding the light from your...
Your eyes are open, right?
Your eyes, I think it's more comfortable if your eyes are closed, but people have different habits, right? So if you're more comfortable with your eyes open, it's probably okay, but on some level, try it with your eyes closed. And then if you can So your elbows get tired, right? So is there a way that you could maybe lean forward a little bit and allow yourself to sort of just hang so that your elbows are resting on your chest and they're somewhat supported? And then you're imagining, not only are you closing all the light out of your eyes, you're allowing yourself to sort of visualize this pitch black darkness, and you could think of it as having the quality of velvet, or the silken smoothness of, a really well-fed black Labrador. So just the idea being that you're closing out the light with your hands physically, but you're imagining it's really, really dark. And just breathe and relax your breath and your jaw and your lips, and see if you can, in the foreground, you're palming, in the background, you're extending your attention, your awareness to the rest of yourself, to notice if you can relax any other part of yourself. And then keep your eyes closed and take your hands away from your eyes, and very, very gently notice what happens. As you start to allow the light behind your closed eyelids, when you take your palms away, you're aware that there's a little bit of light filtering in from one or the other direction. And you can sense that your eyes actually move or respond in some way. And if it wasn't clear, let's try it again, but just try it again lying down. Might be more comfortable. So lie down. If you want to have your legs long, that's fine, or bend your knees, stand your feet. And then see if you can find a way to do this palming lying down, so that you're closing all the light out over your eyes with your hands. And see if you can feel your shoulder blades on the ground beneath you, because you're lying down, and see if you can somehow let the weight of your elbows either rest on your shoulder blades or on your chest somehow. Just see. This is always an operative question in any Feldenkrais lesson. How can you make something that is unfamiliar and somewhat awkward as easy as possible, as comfortable as possible? I think that's a great philosophy for how to live your life, personally. Because life is full of awkward, weird, uncomfortable moments. How can I make it easier? How can I make it more comfortable? Imagining the blackest, thickest darkness. So here we're getting into the question of depth of field, right? So can you imagine this velvety, thick blackness as having depth, distance, width? And here's where I think it gets really interesting. This is a way of resting your eyes, but when I start thinking about depth of field and art, right? During the Renaissance, they figured out finally how to give paintings dimension, so that they're, like if you compare the Renaissance art of the Dutch painters to like the Egyptians, who did hieroglyphic paintings that were flat. They were two-dimensional. It took thousands of years for human beings to understand a way to create an image in 3D that had depth of field, so that it looked like the person was sitting in this beautiful stream of light in front of a window, and you could see that the checkered floor was in front. Like, the names of these artists escapes me. I don't know why that's not. I'm drawing a blank there this morning.
Like Vermeer.
Vermeer, yes, I love those guys. Beautiful.
Yeah. The girl with the pearl earring.
Stuff like, that era for sure. Because I love them because they show normal people doing normal things, like cobblers making shoes, and like what people actually did in great detail and color. And,
The curtains and the lights.
yeah. All right, so take a breath, clear the slate, let your hands rest, and keep your eyes closed and notice the sensation you feel as the light filters back in. And so that's what's going on is within your eyeball itself, there are changes being made in the dilation of, the dilation gets smaller when there's more light. And this is totally counterintuitive, right? When there's more light, the dilation increases. I guess that makes sense. If you think about a cat in the dark, how their eyes change. And then slowly open your eyes and look ahead of you. Maybe roll your head a little bit right and left, but with your eyes open, but not focusing. So allow your eyes to roll, or allow your head to roll right and left, and let your eyes go with you, but without really focusing. And notice how different it is when you allow what you see to come to you and you're not making any attempt to actually focus on it. And this is probably easier if you do have bad vision and you normally wear glasses, because your vision is not clear anyway. And then slowly make it smaller and smaller until allow your head to rest in the middle, and then just rest your eyes in any way you like. So all I can say, what I was going to say before is, for myself, I've worn glasses since I was 6. My father has terrible vision, so it was inherited, and my mother, who was Swiss, she was familiar with people like Rudolf Steiner and Waldorf, and it's very common in Switzerland to have this sort of more natural approach to things. Instead of, when people are maybe mentally impaired to some degree, instead of putting them on massive amounts of pharmaceuticals, they teach them basket weaving. They get them involved in, that's a Rudolf Steiner kind of an approach to getting them involved in something tactile, because it seems to ground people in reality when they use their hands and their bodies and sense things. So anyway, she was open to other ways of dealing with vision other than just, she took me to an optometrist who his name was Dr. Moskowitz, and he had this tiny little room with all of these instruments, and I would go there once or twice a week and do these eye exercises. And you'd look through these little, it was like looking in a microscope, and like when you go to the eye doctor and they switch out the lenses and they have you look at different shapes at different distances. And it did improve my eyes and it improved my vision, but I got terrible headaches from it. So I was already ready for a better, easier way after doing that for a year or two. But it did convince me that eye exercises can work, can help. They may not make vision 20/20, but they definitely can help. And then, so that whole experience was proof to me that there is this relationship between vision and tension that can cause physical pain in the head and the neck, and so it makes sense to me that the premise of natural vision improvement and of Feldenkrais is that, the eyes are in large part of the motor system, part of the musculoskeletal system, and just to get a sense of this idea that the eyes have a lot to do with the way that the muscles of the neck work. open your eyes and roll your head again with the intention of tracking exactly what you see. So as you roll your head from side to side with your eyes open, you may see the wall that's closer to you, maybe the ceiling is further away, and be very specific and centrally focused about how you track the difference in sensation you feel as your eyes focus on something further away or closer to you, and make that smaller and smaller until you rest. I just notice if the sensation you feel in your neck is different than when you were just sort of rolling your head with no intention to really see what you were looking at. And you could go back, try one several times, then try the other again. So go back to looking without focusing, seeing without trying to focus. And then just make that smaller and smaller, and just till you rest your head. And sometimes you'll find that your head rests in a different place, so that this funny way of moving with attention without a lot of stimulus allows your nervous system the space and time it needs to recalibrate what center is. So when you're ready, if you would, bend your knees and stand your feet. And bring your attention to your eyes. See if you can sense the weight of your eyeballs in their sockets. And does that change the way your muscles respond? Do you all of a sudden tense up around your eyes when you try to sense their weight? So with your eyes closed, imagine, we'll go back to the pearl for a moment. So imagine the pearl in front of you at whatever distance, and then allow it to go up, 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 up and away. You remember that song? You're dating yourself. And then allow it to go as far, just follow the sensation you feel in your eyes as they change their focal point. See if you can sense the changes that you feel in the muscles of your eyes as you imagine this pearl going farther away. And then when you get as far away as you'd like, allow it to come back towards you, but imagine it could go back behind you, so that you gently allow the pearl to come as close to you as you can, and it actually goes through the bridge of your nose and behind you into the back of your head, through the floor underneath you. And then play with that range, taking it as far down through the earth as you're comfortable with, perhaps to the center of the earth, but not quite there. And then come back up and just play with that range within the room, and then back down behind you. And see if you can find a way to do that without strain. And I did mention this is a great way to fall asleep if you're having trouble sleeping. I think we've got, one person whose body says, "I'm tired. This is what I really need." Because the nervous system knows what it needs if we give it half a chance. It's just we don't so often. And then let that go. And rest in whatever way you like. So this idea of finding ways to rest even when, we're not necessarily can't lie down, can you rest, can you find ways to rest in any position? So I just wanted to read for a moment from The Use of the Eyes in Movement by Hegge, who is probably a first-generation Feldenkrais practitioner. In other words, I believe he trained directly with Moshe Feldenkrais. So I'm probably a third generation. So I want to acknowledge that these, when you first start teaching Feldenkrais, usually you stick exactly to the thousands of lessons that Moshe Feldenkrais came up with, but then at some point you start getting the principles of it and so it's more derivative. It's a second generation interpretation or a third generation interpretation. So anyway, Hegge, who wrote this book on the use of the eyes, and he wrote a book on skiing. He wrote, yeah.
Skiing with the whole body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He says, first, the area of the brain devoted to processing visual information is unusually large. If we improve the functioning of this large area, the improvement will tend to diffuse itself throughout the entire brain. And second, the eye is an important output device. We usually think of it as a sensory organ only, but there are many direct functional connections between the muscles of the eyes and the state of contraction of the other muscles of the body, i.e. the neck, especially. And finally, the eye is the initiator of many, if not most, of our actions. The initiator. So if you think back to some of the lessons we've done where I keep harping on about, notice the inception of the movement, right? You've heard me say that. How do you initiate the movement? And then the idea of, do your eyes lead or do your eyes follow? That's all about augmenting this thing whereby if you start to notice the initiation of the action, you can make a difference at the beginning, and the trajectory at the other end is changed thereby. So if the use of the eyes is faulty, all of our movements get off to a bad start, is what he says. So just to wrap this up, see if you can roll onto your belly and find a way to be comfortable on your stomach with your face down. So you might put your forehead on your hands, and you might be propped up on your elbows slightly. So you're on your belly, resting your head face down in whatever way you can find that's comfortable. Close your eyes. And now feel the weight of your eyeballs in this position. See if you can sense that because you've changed your orientation in space, the weight of your eyeballs is now forward, not backward. And with your eyes closed, just feel that weight and find this pearl, and imagine the pearl going down, down, down into the center of the earth as far as you can go, and then allow it to come back towards you. And do that several times at your own pace. And notice in the background, foreground, background, notice in the background, are you tensing anywhere in your breathing? Can you soften your shoulders or your neck or your chest? Are you holding any tension in your feet. And the reason why it's important to stay warm is because when we're cold, the muscles contract. That takes effort, right? So we're looking to create an environment that's conducive to shifts in how you pay attention. And that means decreasing the stimulus. So the next time you have that pearl wafting, flowing, moving away from you and back towards you, can you allow it to come close to you and then through your head, as if you could imagine it going up through the back? And imagine, what would it feel like if you follow that pearl upwards as far away as you can go into infinity with your two eyes, as if you could see behind yourself, and be gentle with the muscles of your eyes. If it feels like there's any strain, resort to really thinking of it in terms of imagination, using your imagination. I know I've said this in other recordings, but there's just this huge body of research that demonstrates that when you imagine any activity that involves movement, it makes the nerve endings fire in your brain, and so it does activate and make those synapses connect, and it does reinforce the pathways and help them grow. And if there is this tendency to notice, oh, there I go, I'm tensing the muscles of the eyelids, for example, can you intentionally clear them? And so, it's just sort of this thing that you do again and again and again. It's not like you do it and it's done. It's something like balance that we have to constantly sort of tune in to. Like, am I tensing? Oh, don't need to. Let that go. And then allow that pearl to come forward and just play with it in front of you again. And just notice if, having played with it behind you, which is so unfamiliar, is it somewhat easier to allow it to move forward away from you and back towards you? Is that somehow, is that somehow easier to do, or can you do it with a greater sense of ease and lightness, having played with it the other way? And, consider that when you use parts of yourself, it increases circulation, because the way that circulation works is that the contraction of the muscles increases the blood flow. So if you allow any of your muscles to atrophy, or if you rarely use them, the circulation is decreased. The oxygen is thereby decreased, because it's the circulation that brings the oxygen to the area, to the tissues. So if you ever let any part of you atrophy, it's going to have less oxygen supply. And so these funny ways of moving, even ways using imagination, is increasing the oxygen supply to your brain, to that vast area of the brain that relates to the visual field and to the muscles around the eyes, which will make them healthier. And then let that go, roll onto your back, and just notice as you roll over, can you be soft as you allow the change and the increase in light to enter your field of vision without, like sometimes when we go from a dark place to a light place, there's a temptation to like squint, for example. Can you allow the light in without squinting? And this was a very gentle introduction to palming. Ideally, palming, this thing where you cover your eyes with your palms to rest the eyes, ideally, it's actually wonderful to do it outside on a sunny day, so that when you actually take your hands away after at least a minute, maybe 2 or 3, the contrast between that black, thick, velvety darkness that you've rested your eyes in and the brilliance of the sunlight is much more profound, and you really sense the change very dramatically in your eyes. But it's a great thing to do if you only have 5 minutes and you have a break at work and you can go outside for a moment on a sunny day and find a bench. So let your arms and legs go long and just check in with your original scan. And sometimes it's surprising how much you remember, even though that you remember things you weren't aware of scanning for. Notice anything that's the same as it was in your original scan, or anything that's different. And notice the quality of sensation you feel on the entire left side of your face and left side of your body. The length, depth. And bring your attention to the right side of the face. Notice the difference, any differences in quality, shape. Does it feel more open, more soft? And the entire left side of the body, length, depth, breadth. And then, as with any lesson, we want to bring these things that we've played with into a function. So, the function being coming up to standing and walking. How can you allow what you see to come to you? And notice that vision does play it plays a large part in balance as well. And perhaps we become too dependent on vision as a way of working with balance when we get older. So how could you be gentle and soft with your eyes as you come to standing? So when you're ready, roll to one side, come to standing, and just see what it feels like to open your eyes and look around yourself now, having done a lot of work with these very small muscles around the eyes, using fine motor control. You just stand for a moment, let your arms hang, see if you can feel the weight of your shoulders, or the weight of your arms. Can you allow the weight of your arms sort of be felt in your shoulders so that your shoulders are not up by your ears? And then you slowly turn around and look around yourself. And also be aware of how's your peripheral vision compared to when you started? Are you more aware of things that are to the side or almost behind you than you were? Take a little walk around. Take it for a test drive. This way of seeing with soft eyes. And this idea of background, foreground, or foreground, background, walking in the foreground, but in the background being aware of anything else that you happen to notice. All right. Thanks for listening.